Thank you, George. I feel I'm the one who should thank anyone who's brave enough to be in this session with me. Uh, if you have an interest in theory, usually that word scares people away, but I'm going to take a stab at this. It's a topic I feel I can handle, and maybe give you some food for thought if you're into research or if you're just curious about what my topic or what the title of my topic is all about. So I want to see if I could actually change slides. I can. Can I go back? I can. Great. Good. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Ferreira, and the title of my presentation is a review of qualitative theoretical perspectives in educational technology. It's a mouthful, yeah. My name is Dan Ferreira, and I'm a contract lecturer at Sophia University in downtown Tokyo, and am a Google certified trainer and an Apple teacher. I've been an educator for close to 2 decades, mostly in the greater Tokyo region, and have served as an English language teacher and an instructional tech coach at several public and private universities. And I hold a doctorate in education with a specialization in e-learning from North Central University, San Diego, California. My dissertation topic was on the barriers and successes of teacher use of instructional communication technology for teaching purposes. And I served as an advisor at the Technical Advisory Committee, which provides professional technical assistance and advice to the Japan Association of Language Teachers, otherwise known as JALT here in Japan. And it is the largest English language teaching organization in Japan, so far as I know, at least English speaking. And I currently serve as the publicist right now for Okinawa JALT chapter. And I thank the Okinawa JALT people for bringing me on board. I'm looking forward to fulfilling my role. Okay, let's see. I changed the title slide. The outline of my presentation is I'm going to talk a little bit about the quantitative approach vis-a-vis my research question and when I did my doctorate. And so I think I need to sort of touch on that a little bit if I'm going to talk about the qualitative. I'm also going to look very briefly at, theory and education. Is there a place for it? How should we treat it? I'll give you some food for thought in that area. Then I'm going to move on to two theoretical approaches for the qualitative inquiry. I can only touch on two given the limits of this presentation, but one of them, as I mentioned before, is going to be sort of connected with Richard's presentation. So I look forward to any questions he might have if any come forth, or I might have questions for him actually when I'm done. Okay, moving forward. The sudden shift to emergency remote learning in 2020 has resulted in many instructors worldwide having to bear the burden of integrating new digital media with learning objectives without being able to confidently determine how those efforts affect learning outcomes. This is due to the fact that on a global scale, many teachers have been largely untrained in aligning the use of digital tools to meet curriculum learning objectives in an online or blended learning environment. Although there's no shortage of research devoted to various uses of ICT tools in the day-to-day practice, um, there is a need to address the techno-pedagogical underpinnings of the decision-making process. Theoretical perspectives retain the potential to enhance focus on how evolving digital tools or digital technologies impact language learning objectives. Until recently, the research trend in educational technology studies have shown an overwhelmingly substantial bias toward quantitative studies. And there remains a dearth, a big gap in the research design studies devoted to the exploration and explanation as opposed to the positivist pretest post-test approach that is so common today. In this presentation, I will introduce a couple of qualitative theoretical perspectives that I hope can shed some light on the use of educational technology that moves beyond those most commonly used in the natural sciences. So let's see if I can change my next slide here. Oh yes, it works. Okay. Before I forge ahead on the merits of various qualitative theoretical perspectives, I feel the quantitative approach to education warrants some discussion. Early on my doctoral journey, I often thought about the adage, And let's see if I can pull this up here. All right, there we go. A quantitative approach tells you where to dig, and a qualitative approach tells you when to stop. And like most novice doctoral researchers, I was consumed with which approach to use when addressing my research problem. But I realized in doing that, I was actually putting the cart before the horse. And so like most novice doctoral researchers, it quickly became apparent that deciding which research approach to use before doing a thorough scan of the literature based on my research problem was the equivalent of what you see in this picture. Over time, I learned that it was the nature of the research question that determined which approach I should use. All right, let's see if I can get this working now. I seem to hit a snag here. What's going on? Okay, let's try that. There we go. All right. In my journey of sifting through the vast amount of scholarly research, I realized an overwhelming majority of articles used one form of quantitative approach or another, and that those studies didn't even come close to helping me answer my research question. In fact, I even thought that the way to resolve my problem was to tweak my question to fit the approach. And clearly that that frustration fueled frustration in my research. And then I realized that that was coming from a research bias on my part, to filter search results that were mostly based on the traditional scientific approach. And what I mean by traditional, let's see if I can get the next slide in there. Here we go. By traditional, for example, the pretest posttest research design is a hallmark of the empirical scientific approach used in the hard sciences. Its popularity in the science lab is due in part to the need to find a universal truth in the findings of an experiment, which in turn allows one to not only explain why things happen the way they do, but also to be able to generalize how we understand phenomenon in the world. And what I mean by truth and generalization is the idea that if one were to repeat the same experiment and apply the same intervention under the same conditions, no matter where you are in the world, regardless of creed, color, or persuasion, one would achieve the same results. There's a book I read by Gary Thomas, and I'd like to share this quote with you. I'll read it right now. It says, scholars of one kind or another are often seeking something that brings information together, organizes it, and seeks generalization on the basis of that organization, and then explains and or predicts on the basis of that generalization. Take a moment to let that sink in. While I have no problems with the noble efforts of bringing information together, organizing it and such, and even trying to explain why things happen the way they do vis-a-vis my research question, I had some reservations about doing such research for the purpose of generalizing or predicting for a couple of reasons. First off, the pre-test, post-test quantitative research design encourages one to hypothesize or guess or predict why things happen the way they do, and then test to see if that prediction has any merit. If you think about it, the pre-test, post-test design already works on the assumption that you know where to start digging in the first place. And while this approach has and continues to yield some bona fide, tried, tested, and true findings about what we know about the natural world in the hard sciences, many scholars question the appropriateness of quantitative approach for the social sciences for a number of reasons. And let's see if I can get this changed. There we go. As you can see from this photo, education, a branch of the social sciences, is already a broad term. Even if you were to narrow to research in education to, say, second language acquisition, you would still end up with a very complex picture like you see here. In my research experience, I've benefited from using the pre-test, post-test design to study the use of free writing as a technique to increasing the use of words and English as a foreign language writing class in a Japanese higher education setting. And to be fair, the quantitative approach has more robust tools in its repertoire to handle multiple aspects or variables, as they call it. But not all aspects of the social science can be easily reduced to a quantifiable unit of measure. So maybe you've seen this picture before. Excuse me, I have a bug in my throat. Here we go. Like the picture illustrates, my experiment and my experience with the premise of the quantitative approach and my assessment of research articles that use some form of quantitative research design reduced what I knew about the phenomenon of second language acquisition to a specific area of inquiry. And I've personally benefited greatly from learning how to narrow my research question to address a particular aspect of SLA. However, the design of my research question for my doctoral dissertation required a paradigm shift that challenged the way I understood the phenomenon of my research problem. To carry the metaphor of the picture you see in front of you a little further, I needed to know more about the whole nature of the animal in question, and I needed an approach that not only helped me explain how all the parts of the animal were interrelated, but also allowed for analyzing a phenomenon that wasn't easily reducible to quantifiable units of measure. I believe this quote I'm going to share with you now, I was talking to Richard about. This is coming from Larson Freeman's 1997 article, and I'd like to read it for you right now. It says, the traditional approach to science, which attempts to understand behavior of the whole by examining its parts piecemeal, is inadequate for studying complex systems. Now, in parentheses, I also added, like language learning, teaching with digital media. So, and I really like this quote because in short, I needed a different approach, a different rationale that was more holistic and more open-ended. Now I'm going to transition to talking about theory, and which I've kind of avoided until now. And that's because I've avoided it for a couple of reasons. And one of those reasons is because, as Gary Thomas in his book warns, there's a tendency to use theory to straitjacket or confine the need for curiosity. Another reason is because some consumers of scholarly research snobbishly dismiss studies if they're not anchored in theory. And although the use value of theory and social science is beyond the scope of this presentation, I do encourage you to read this book, particularly chapter 2, which is what's the use of theory in education? And chapter 3, where's the theory behind you? Oh, no, it isn't. And one particular passage that resonated with me in the chapter 3 was about the Wright brothers, which I'd like to draw a picture of here. Maybe you do or you don't know about the Wright brothers, but in case you don't, and if you do, I apologize, it's a bit of a refresher. But the Wright brothers, as you may recall, were two brothers that owned the bicycle shop, and to overcome their boredom of selling and repairing bicycles, they would take creative breaks to explore the possibility of flight by attaching wings to their bicycles. Now, you know how the rest goes, right? But the important thing is that Thomas points out that their discovery was actually atheoretical, of anti-theory, if you will. And he writes, if I got it here, I got the quote I'll bring up for you. Here we go. It's almost as if the deliberate casting off of existing knowledge, and by contrast, of the acceptance of ideas which arise from serendipity, chance, dream, metaphor, and the process of sudden insight, whereby ideas appear from nowhere, is actually helpful. So how I understand this is that sometimes it's good to break out on your own and then not be pinned down by theory per se. That's where new ideas come from. But having said all of that, he coined a term called intelligent noticing to emphasize the need for creating opportunities to explore possibilities and the unknown, or in the case, the untried. So this now opens my opportunity to take a stab at this. Let's see if I got it in here. Oh, go back. Let's see if I can go back. There we go. This, what was I planning with this one here? Oh, I see. I know. Yeah. That's a duplicate. Sorry about that. I'd like to forge ahead into this idea called the complexity theory, otherwise known as chaos theory. And so while I agree that one needs to exercise caution in using or abusing theory and research, I believe there is room to incorporate creative exploration of theoretical musings and in the way we embark on the task of understanding something as complex as language learning and ICT integration. One creative exploration of a theory that led to the development of quantum mechanics is actually complexity theory. And I quoted earlier from the seminal article by Larson Freeman in 1997. And although it might have seemed quite radical to propose using complexity theory for research and education, the takeaways seem quite rewarding. And here's a list of some of them. By the way, this is Diane's article I've been referring to. It's called Chaos, Complexity Science, and Second Language Acquisition. Seminal. I mean, don't let the year fool you, but read it. And you'll really enjoy it. I've got some snippets for you. Holism versus reductionism. Expansionism versus reductionism. Exploration versus prediction. And then retracing steps from an outcome and what I like to call reverse engineering. These are some of the ideas that I think really, really add to, well, kind of really are worth venturing into the world of CT or complexity theory in education. And one in particular I really liked that really resonated with me for my research question was that last one, retracing steps from an outcome, or what I like to call reverse engineering. The butterfly effect is one of these ideas that comes from complexity theory. For example, in the idea of reverse engineering is another concept. What's the butterfly effect? Well, it's the concept that being a very small change can lead to very different significant effects, such as a butterfly flapping its wings can eventually impact the weather conditions in another part of the world. When you apply the concept of the butterfly effect when researching the use of digital media for teaching and learning purposes, you start to question many assumptions that you have. For example, when trying to figure out why some students may have difficulties in using what you as a teacher might perceive as user-friendly software, you're looking at different variables like maybe language interface, typing ability, even students' posture when they're using computers, and things like that could be a factor in why that eventually cascades into a significant problem. And these are things we don't normally think about, but maybe we should start paying attention to more details. And that's what the butterfly effect is all about and how it could be useful. Let's see if I can get this going here. Here we go. Broke the camel's back. Similar to the butterfly effect is the notion of the broke the camel's back notion, which describes how a seemingly minor or a routine action causes an unpredictably large and sudden reaction because of the cumulative effect of small actions. An example of this broke the camel's back, maybe I'm getting away from this a little bit, but is the idea of maybe introducing a seemingly minor technology or technological device in a class that's in a digitized learning environment where students may already feel overwhelmed with many other technologies. So the broke the camel's back, as I understand it, could explain why maybe students would like resist or push back, because it was like that, that extra tech that you brought in there was the cascading moment. That's when they said, no, this is too much for me. So it's worth looking into these two ideas, the butterfly effect and broke the camel's back when working with this concept. So George, by the way, how am I doing for time? I think I'm okay. My watch is off. So in approaching a research problem that combines second language acquisition, I feel this reminder by Larson Freeman to be apropos. And let me pull it up here. Remember that in complex nonlinear systems, the behavior of the whole emerges out of an interaction of its parts. Studying the parts in isolation one by one will tell us about each part, but not how they interact. And so some recommended reading I have here So I'm just looking at my time. I can't tell how much I have left, but I'll forge
You
ahead.
have 10 minutes, Dan, and actually the next session is canceled. So if you want to go a little bit more, that's good too. Maybe you
Thank you.
can,
Thank you very much. I might
opt,
have to.
Richard.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll actually note that down, put it 10 minutes. Okay. These couple of articles are more recent, but I like the, I'm sort of reading them right now, and Chasing the Butterfly Effect, Informal Language Learning Online as a Complex System. Very, very interesting. I encourage you to read it. You can get these for free if you do a Google Scholar search. The second one could be really useful for actually applying CT, or a complexity theory, in a research design, because it gives you ideas on how to do the coding. If you collect worded data, it can give you some suggestions on how to search for themes and codes when you put it all together. Okay. Which uh, allows me to segue into another theoretical concept that I found very useful for my dissertation. Let me see if I can get my notes together on this. Seem to have lost something here. I seem to have lost a whole slide, guys. I'm really sorry about that, but something is missing. All right, so I'm going to forge ahead with talking about activity theory at this point. So let's see. Activity theory is an example of a framework that attempts to hold the whole, as Larson Freeman puts it, as a unit of analysis. It is based on Vygotsky's original concept of the triadic interaction of the subject, tool, object dynamic, and how that plays in knowledge formation. As you can see here, you got subject, tool, and object. He's known for viewing society as a generative force directly involved in the construction of the mind. And if you're new to the concept of this, subject refers to the learner. Tool refers to, well, in the Vygotskyan sense, as it's more psychological. It's like language. And object, in another word for object, could be objective, which is to learn or communicate, or even goal would be a good word instead of object. It could be a bit confusing, but once you get your head around that, that's pretty much what it means. Recommended reading. If you haven't read this, I strongly recommend it. At least this would be the first of a couple of books. Mind and Society, the Development of Higher Psychological Processes. Eventually, over time, his triad of subject, object, tool, which you can still see at the top of this more complex system, morphed into what is now called the cultural historic activity theory. You should notice that there's the addition of rules at the bottom left-hand corner, and then to the right of that, you have community, and to the right of that, you have division of labor. In short, this framework has been instrumental in studying human activity and the interrelationship of the social context as one unit of measure. So in addition to education, this framework, by the way, has been instrumental in other fields such as the medical sciences and human-computer interaction, just to name a couple. So it's not just for education. This model is instrumental for planning the use of any new technique that may also include new digital media. After implementing the plan, one can assess the degree of success in the outcome. So yeah, I forgot about, from object to the right, outcome was added as well. And if after implementing your plan, you find that something is not working, if you didn't attain success, what you can do then is that idea from complexity theory, you do some reverse engineering. So you start to go back or retrace, as Larman Freeman would say, where it is that there was some kind of disruption or some kind of disconnect, and take a moment to see pretty much how this diagram can help you to ask those kind of questions to zero in on where your problem is. So this is by Zurita and Nussbaum. I really like this. They have, for example, for the subject, who is involved in the common goal in carrying out this object. I like rules. Are there any individual or group norms, rules, and roles governing the performance of this activity? So these could be really important questions to ask when you're talking about incorporating, any technique or any tool in an educational setting. For my doctoral dissertation, I used this framework to guide my qualitative action research study. just as I stated in the abstract. I was curious to know how teachers were who were not formally trained in ICT integration dealt with any barriers of using such tech for teaching purposes, given that they're not formally trained. So my dissertation, by the way, the title's a bit of a mouthful, but you can see it at the top here. It was called a qualitative action research study of barriers to information and communication technology integration at an Eastern Japan liberal arts college. If by any means you are interested in reading this dissertation, it's not that long, but if you are interested in reading it, you can contact me and I'll give you a free copy. Otherwise, if you go to ProQuest, I think you have to pay. This other source I have at the bottom, let's see, is by, I don't know if I got the name right, Goodenough. Is a study I couldn't include in my research because it's geared for kindergarten through 9, but I really like the way the study design incorporates collaborative action research with the activity theory framework and the results that they got out of that. And I'm going to take a moment here to just sort of read a little excerpt from it. Through the lens of cultural historical activity theory, the author examined what digital tools teachers were using, the contextual factors that influenced their teaching and classroom practice, and the outcomes of this professional development initiative. So changing the activity system of the teachers is described, as well as how they addressed contradictions in their practice. Addressing these contradictions resulted in an expansion of their objective and professional growth. The study contributed to a growing body of research in teacher education, which applies the CHAT, or cultural historical activity theory framework. And I strongly recommend that you read this article. I believe you can get it for free also from Google Scholar. So if you look that up. Now, in conclusion, I want to sum up by also throwing out, we can only cover 2 frameworks, but I think that sort of have a connection that I thought would be useful for you to look into. But by all means, there are other theories worth looking into that could really change your perspective on how it is you approach teaching or maybe any research design. One of them being sociocultural theory. Then you have emergentism and actor network theory. And those are at least 3 that I recommend that you look into. I'm going to do the same myself. And here are some photo credits, just, for copy. I didn't come up with those photos, so I'm just attributing where they came from. And I'm ready to take any question and answer if I have any time, George. I believe I do.
You do indeed, Dan. Right now we're at 12:57. So our next session is going to begin, sorry, 13:57. Our next session begins at 14:10. So maybe if we take, let's say 8 minutes, or well, let's start with 5. I'm sorry, because yeah, we do need to get
Sure.
the next.
If there are any questions,
Yeah.
maybe I have a question. Richard, how did I handle complexity theory?
I was just about to ask you a question, and then you asked me one first.
Okay, go ahead. Excuse me.
So thanks, Dan. It was very interesting, and this is just my personal preference, but I'm a classroom teacher, so of course I like coming to conferences and hearing about teaching and teaching ideas and research based on teaching and whatnot. But I also am really interested in theory and philosophy, and thank you for taking on this task, because I know it must be pretty well, if it were me, it would be intimidating coming to a conference and thinking, are people actually going to be interested in theory? But definitely I was interested, and I am interested. So thank you, Dan. My question is kind of connecting those 2 theories together. So, I've been using complexity perspectives a lot, and there are certain dangers with complexity. You know, there's this whole vocabulary that can get a bit complex in and of itself, and that is scary for many people, and that that's particularly classroom practitioners might be wary of. Personally, I think we deal with complexity every day in the classroom and outside the classroom, so it's not a big deal for me, I don't think. But what I was wondering was, I'm not familiar, of course. I've heard of the other theory, but I'm not as familiar with it. So I'm just wondering, is there that kind of what problem or potential problem with terminology?
You know, of the studies that I've seen, first of all, activity theory or cultural historical
Yeah.
activity theory is not really a theory per se. In fact, some people, they call it a meta theory, or they prefer to even use the word framework, and I do as well, because all it really does is it gets you to think about how things connect. And so one of the criticisms actually of cultural historical activity theory is that it's great for fault finding or failure analysis, as they call it, but it's not very good at guiding you to success. But at the very least, I think its use value is, you know, before you could actually start fixing something, you got to know where the problem is. And I think it's useful in that way. And I think it's relatively easy to use. When I used it in my research design, my action research design, I actually sat down with each of my participants, gave them a quick little 15-minute run through on what it was all about. And I showed them that picture with all that triangle with all the different parts. Like I'd explain what rules mean, or community and division of labor, and why that was significant for teaching. And I asked them to keep a journal while they implemented whatever digital technology it was they were going to incorporate in there, and then report back on. And the way they could report back on it is by isolating any one of these aspects. So basically, I mean, you talked about vocabulary and terminology. It actually gave them a common vocabulary and a terminology by which they could communicate with me and with others, and with what they were doing, that I believe partly explained why they perceived themselves as being successful when they were, or not successful when they weren't.
Okay.
I don't know if that's answering your question, but
It does. It's certainly good to hear that the vocabulary, you know, what was beneficial. You were able to incorporate it into your study with your participants, and for them to have an understanding of the vocabulary of this theory. You mentioned like activity theory is kind of being held up as a meta theory, complexity theory too, and I think that's something that was kind of misunderstood for a while. In my area is kind of language learner psychology, and there was this misunderstanding that it was going to replace actual theories of, for example, language learning motivation or general motivation or something like that. And Diane Larson Freeman has, over the years, made it clearer and clearer that it's a meta theory. It just encourages us to think in different ways that she thinks are more useful. And we still need actual theories of particular processes and whatnot. But at the same rate, she kind of makes it clear that a meta theory is not the same as a theory of everything.
yeah.
So it's not trying to replace everything.
Right.
And I think some people have really gotten quite angry in cases, and upset that, you know, that complexity is going to take over everything, and it's not trying to do that, I don't think. But you've certainly made me interested in activity theory, so I'll look into it more. Thank you. I'll let somebody else ask.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Richard. We okay for time, George?
We're good, Dan. absolutely. Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, I don't see any questions in the chat.
If I can just
Christopher,
add
you had
one
a
more
question
thing
for Richard earlier that might
Okay.
actually fit in here.
If I could just maybe then wrap up by
Absolutely.
saying something that I think Richard brought up was really good. It's earlier in my quest to find an approach to answer my research question. I actually even considered changing the question to fit the tool. In this case, quantitative approach. That how do I make a pretest post-test out of this to answer my? But my question was that wasn't the nature of it. So while I'm not trying to poo-poo on quantitative approach, what I am trying to say is that by considering theoretical perspectives or different ways of thinking, you start to hold more true to your problem. You start to think of your problem and you problem solve in completely different ways. And so this, what I liked from CT and the overlap with AT, if you will, or chat, is this whole idea of coming at the problem from a different angle. So instead of coming at from head on, I was actually like doing this reverse engineering idea, and it just worked perfectly. I finished a dissertation. I got my research question answered, and I feel fulfilled. And because I hunted down and I was a critical consumer of not just the literature that's out there, but also the way I was perceiving my problem and what I was reading. So I just wanted to add that in there. There's no need to be afraid. You could even pick and choose something from CT that doesn't have to, you don't have to embrace the whole thing. Just from reading the Larson Freeman article, Break the Camel's Back and Butterfly Effect have added new enthusiasm to where I'm going to go next in my research, because I like to maybe fuse the two, AT and a little bit of CT in my next exploration, whatever that might be. I don't know just yet, but.
Dan, that's interesting you saying that, because when I was first getting interested in complexity and there was this snowball of this article leads to this article and this book and whatnot, it was so exciting. And I've kind of come to a point now where I'm still on board with complexity, but I've lost those new forms of input, and it's almost kind of saddening to get to this point where you've become saturated. I'm not saying I know everything about complexity, but if I come across an article about the theory in particular, then it's not going to say anything new that I haven't encountered already. So again, it's good for me to be introduced to activity theory. Thanks, Dan. Can I just ask you, are you publishing from your dissertation, or have you published?
I managed to reduce my whole dissertation to what was it, an 8,000 word article, and I've submitted it to a journal. Actually, it's submitted to a second journal. I got rejected by one with great feedback about how I can improve it. And so now I've submitted to another journal, and I'm waiting to hear their response to that. But that's what I'm working on right now. But I've got another project lined up that's going to explore the use of what do you call it? AI, like for example, Google Home as a learning assistant. And I want to start a project with another teacher at another university where we're going to get a bunch of Google Homes and put them in our students' houses, and then sort of explore how it can assist them in learning language. So I think CT and AT are going to come in handy for that project, no doubt. Yeah, it sounds very complex.
It sounds very interesting, Dan. You've got interesting ideas for research.
I've got your email, so maybe when I put my proposal together, if you're interested in climbing on board, I think the more the merrier. So
thanks, Dan. Thanks.
I'll check to see where you are at what point in your if you don't have too many projects, but if you're interested in that. By the way, where are you? What university are you?
I'm at Rikyo. Sure. Well, I say at, but the use of prepositions is a bit weird this year, isn't it? I've been into Rikyo for 4 or 5 times. So
That's about 2 or 3 more than me. Okay, good to know. You're in the Tokyo region, so that's great.
yeah, I'm actually in Gunma.
Oh, my wife's from Takasaki.
Wow. Okay. Close to Takasaki. So it's a bit of a trek to get into Rikyo.
Okay.
So I'm not actually that upset that we're online.
Wow, right on. Wow. Okay, cool. Maybe when I'm in Guma, next time I'm in town, I'll send you an email, and I can recommend a few restaurants to you because I've been there often enough, and maybe you can do the same for me.
Cheers.
All right, George. Shall we move on to the big room?
Absolutely. Ladies and gentlemen, can I get a round of applause for Dr. Dan Ferreira? Thank you, Dan.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
So we'll resume at 14:50
Okay.
with our 5th session. And this should be, again, exciting. I am so glad I'm in room 2. And we'll be looking at Miho Nagai's presentation about trigger creativity and learning in an EFL class via hip hop,
Ooh.
light feet music.
So I'm going to go to the main room, George, and then maybe I'll see you back here shortly.
Super. Thanks.
Brother.
Yeah.
All right. So leave break.